Good evening. I'm Lynette Clementson, Director of the Wallace House Center for Journalists here at the University of Michigan. Yeah, we like that applause. We have two programs here at the university that I hope you're well acquainted with. The Knight Wallace Fellowships for Journalists that brings reporters from around the world here to the university community for a year of immersive study and a chance to expand their skills and take on challenges that are facing the journalism industry. We have our Knight Wallace Fellows in the audience. If you all could just wave your hands, you'll get a chance to meet them. Some of them likely showed you to your seats. You'll hear some of them as we're moderating questions at the end of the conversation, and you'll get to know them as they play an important part in our community over the year. The other program that we run has more of an East Coast identity. It's a journalism awards program called the Livingston Awards for Young Journalists. The Livingston Awards gives 3 awards for excellence in reporting for local, national, and international reporting each year in June. In the journalism world, people sometimes refer to the Livingstons as the Pulitzers for the young because they are awards for journalists under 35. Anna Quindlen, who's here with us tonight, has been a long-time member of our Wallace House family as a Livingston Awards judge for over 15 years. And the Livingston Awards, being a judge for the Livingston Awards is incredibly hard work. We get over 500 entries a year of the best journalism being done across every platform over the course of a year. And so when you sign up to be a judge, you are signing up for some serious work, but it's also work that I'm sure Anna will tell you is inspiring and makes you feel confident about the future of journalism and the role of journalism as a pillar of our society. We also, and the reason you're here tonight, run a program called Wallace House Presents. And our mission at Wallace House is to reinforce the vital role of journalism in our society. And part of what's important about journalism is that it enables an informed and engaged public and allows us to have informed, I say informed, civic conversation. And so through Wallace House Presents, we bring journalists to Ann Arbor and to locations around the country to talk about the things that journalists are writing about, topics that are pressing in the news and in our lives, and to get people, hopefully from different backgrounds and with different points of view, talking about the things journalists are writing about, and also to bring transparency to the work of journalists. If you passed any of our fellows coming in, you might have noticed that some of them were probably wearing buttons that said, "Uphold democracy, support journalists." And that's an important set of words for us. We all know what is happening to our democracy and the ways in which our democracy is under threat right now in the United States and in countries around the world are evident. And if you're here, hopefully you know that one of the ways we work towards safeguarding our democracy is safeguarding a free and independent press and upholding the role of journalists. And so that is one of the reasons that we do these events. So thank you for coming out tonight. I'd like to thank our co-sponsors for the evening, the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts here at the University of Michigan, the Department of English Language and Literature, Detroit Public Television, which is streaming this event tonight, Literati Bookstore, and Michigan Radio. Because the event is being streamed, we have many people joining us tonight via their devices, and we will be following their questions as well on Twitter. You can tweet to us using the hashtag Wallace House. And I believe as you were seeing scrolls when you were coming in to sit down, our Twitter handle, Wallace House, you can find it on Twitter. And we have someone here in the audience who's going to be following the questions from our online audience, and we'll be working those into the conversation as well. For those of you who might slip out early, I also want to mention to you up front the other events we have coming up. You also saw those scrolling on the screen. On November 1st, 1 week before the midterms, we will be back in this room with Jelani Cobb, a writer for The New Yorker, and Dean of the School of Journalism at Columbia University. Jelani will be joined by Celeste Watkins Hayes, who is Dean of the Ford School here, and they will be talking about race, media, and democracy. And the event is intentionally, provocatively called The Half-Life of Freedom. So I hope you will join us here with Jelani. And then on November 28th, the Monday after Thanksgiving weekend, we will be at the Michigan Theater. For those of you who follow big breaking stories, you may remember that several years ago, 2 reporters from the New York Times and a reporter at the New Yorker almost simultaneously broke a big story about Harvey Weinstein. The 2 reporters from the New York Times, Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey, turned their work into a book called She Said. She Said has been turned into a major motion picture. The film comes out on November 19th, and as soon as they finish with the big red carpet premieres, they are coming to Ann Arbor. We will be hosting Jodi and Megan at the Michigan Theater, where we will screen the film, and I'll be interviewing Megan and Jodi on stage. And I think that's going to be not one to miss. So we hope to see you many times this semester. Now, why are we here tonight? There was a meme that I saw online recently that said, "Weird stuff that makes adults happy." And one of the things in one of the boxes was writing with a really good pen. And I said, guilty, that's me. You know that feeling when you put a pen on paper and you can feel the ball of the pen and the heaviness, and it makes your writing look nicer than it actually is. When Anna told me more than a year ago at one of our Livingston Award gatherings that this was the topic of her next book, Write for Your Life, even before she had finished it, I think, I said, you have to come and talk about that book on campus, for a couple of reasons. One, because, of course, we've just come through a period in history where in the moment, we knew that we were living through history and thought we would remember everything, and now we realize that we can't even remember what was last week, last month, or 2 years ago. And time has become so fuzzy, and our memories have become fuzzy, and I think we'll ask tonight how many people took time to really write down how they experienced the past 2 years. The other thing is that we live not just in our campus community, but all over, in a world where we now do most of our expression via text and email. And so thinking about the power of writing, not just for our interaction with other people, but for our own wellness, feels like something incredibly important to talk about. A lot of times when we talk about things in the news, we are talking about, I feel, as director of Wallace House, that we do programs that are about how dire things are in the world. And if something rises to the level of us being on stage to bring someone into town to talk about it, it's likely because it's a crisis. And this, I felt like, was an opportunity to step back and really talk about things that we do have control over, things that allow us to enhance our connection with other people. And so I'm going to turn it over to our guests. You saw their bios on the screen. Anne Curzan has so many roles in the life of Wallace House. To many of you, she is the Dean of Literature, Science, and the Arts. To those of you who listen to Michigan radio, she is our favorite linguist who we listen to every Sunday on That's What They Say, and she can answer the strange questions about words and sentences and turns of phrase that we say all the time, and we have no idea why we say them and where they came from. She is also a member of the Wallace House Board. She is a regular speaker to our Knight Wallace Fellows, and for the past several years, such an engaging speaker that when we finish our time with her, we're not done because we're journalists and we're obsessed with words, and so she has to come back and talk to us some more. So we're thrilled to have Anne Curzan here guiding this conversation with the one and only Anna Quindlen. I've just been actually messaging friends for the past 24 hours saying, Anna Quindlen's here. Anna Quindlen's in town. I just drove Anna Quindlen to her hotel. Anna Quindlen just was at Wallace House for dinner. I'm going to see Anna Quindlen tonight. So you know how I feel about Anna. She is a national treasure. Most journalists, I think, hope one day they might write a book. If most of us write one, we think of ourselves as very, very lucky. Anna has written more than 21. She is a groundbreaking reporter who was the first woman Metro editor at the New York Times, a columnist for the New York Times and for Newsweek, both places where I worked. And Anna was a hero to those of us who were there at the time when I started. And she has all of these fiction and nonfiction books. And you look at her and you're like, how do you do that? And when you read her, her words are so simple and approachable and unpretentious, and they allow you to tap into the things that you're feeling and you don't even know you're feeling. I posted something on Facebook last night about Anna Quindlen being in Ann Arbor. And one of our fellows, Assad Timmery, who's here in the front row, Assad is here as a recent evacuee from Afghanistan. And he posted a comment to my post that I thought was so lovely, and it said something to the effect that Anna Quindlen is a treasure. Even if you only speak a little bit of English, you can understand everything she says. And I thought that was so beautiful. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anne Curzan and Anna Quindlen, and we're going to talk a little bit about writing. We're going to have time for your questions at the end. When it comes time for questions, I'll come back up. There are mics in the aisles. We'll guide you through conversation, and I'm so excited and so thankful that you're both here. Thank you.
Well, I'm also thrilled to be here. Lynette, thank you for that really meaningful and beautiful introduction. I have also all day been saying, guess what I get to do tonight? I get to interview Anna Quindlen. So I just have to start by saying that I'm a deep admirer of you and your work. I have read many of your novels and columns, and your passion for the written word just comes shining through everything that you write. And I would guess everyone here, if you've read any of Anna Quindlen's books, or the one we're talking about today, Write for Your Life, there are these sentences that just stick with you. And you have one near the end about writing is a net, catching memories and pinning them to a board, like people do with butterflies. And I just love that. Writing is this net that's catching memories. And I also deeply admire your career as a groundbreaking journalist at the New York Times and Newsweek. And you can, in this book, there are, to me, fiercely feminist arguments about whose histories get told, whose are unseen, unincluded, not written down, and I hope we'll get to talk about all of that. And when Lynette asked me if I would do this interview, I jumped at the chance, and what a pleasure for me. I feel like I get to interview you as a linguist, as a writer, as someone who's dedicated my own career to writing and to language, as a teacher of writing, as a former director of the writing program here at the University of Michigan, and as a human. And so much of this book is about writing and humanity, writing and humanness. So I was also thinking about you this past weekend when I was cooking chili, and I was using an index card with the recipe that was my mother's. And it had my mother's handwriting, because she kept all her recipes on cards. And so I was cooking this with her writing, which, as you write about, writing conjures up a person, right? And when I cook with her recipes, she is there, and there were stains on the card, and I had just read your book, and I was thinking, are those from the chili that she made, or the chili that I have made over the years that has fallen onto this card? So I'm going to start with a question for you, and then I have a few questions for the audience so that we can get a sense of how you all write, and then you and I will get to talk until about 7, and then we'll take questions from the audience. So what a pleasure. And the place I wanted to start was that as a teacher of writing, one of the things that I'm always trying to convince students of is that we write to figure out what we think. That it's not that we know what we think and then we write it down. And if we do that, it's probably not that interesting. That the really interesting things are the things we figure out as we write. And so I wanted to start by asking that with this book, Write for Your Life, what is a thing that you feel like you figured out in writing the book?
Oh my gosh, I don't even know where to begin with that question, Anne, because it's become commonplace in my work, and certainly it happened all the time when I was a columnist, that I would write a paragraph and look at it and think, that's not what I think. Oh my goodness, what is that doing there? You know, you'd write down what seemed like a good idea or seemed like a clever observation, and then think, no, gotta go deeper, gotta go deeper, gotta go deeper. And I think in this book, that happened over and over again. Not that the initial impulse was not correct, but that I realized that I had to go deeper over and over again, that there were things about the written word and the need for all of us to embrace it that I had to drill down on more honestly and more thoroughly. I'm glad you brought up your mother's recipe card, because that's a thing that I was determined to include in this book, and that's writing by hand. I had a lot of material about the Palmer method, and if you're under 60, you probably have no idea what that is. Okay, so it's a particular way of learning to write cursive, which people don't learn anymore, that was thoroughly embraced, certainly in Catholic school, which is where I was educated for most of my early education, and that resulted in pretty beautiful handwriting. And my editor and my agent both persuaded me to pull back on the Palmer method stuff a little bit. But they were also skeptical about the handwriting chapter, and I was not going to pull back on that, not because writing by hand is important in our day-to-day life, but because it's talismanic over the course of history. So for you to look at that card, it's a connection to your mother. It's a piece of her that doesn't exist any other way. And when I see my father's handwriting on a piece of paper that I have in a file drawer, or when I see my children's writing when they're just beginning to learn how to write their names on the bottom of their artwork, it gives me a connection to them, a piece of them that doesn't exist any other way. And the truth is, we all know this from experience. We've all pulled those letters out of drawers. We've all seen that signature that says to us, oh, it's her. And yet somehow we let the opportunity to do it ourselves pass by. And one of the things I wanted to do in this book was just to say, write a postcard, sign your name on a card, put a couple lines in a drawer, because I can absolutely guarantee you from experience that someday someone will find that and feel a tremor in their heart that nothing else can provide.
That's really beautiful. And there, you, at one point in the book, say, and I don't think I'd ever put it quite this way, that one of the things about handwriting is it could only have been you.
Exactly.
Right? That as opposed to a typed note where we believe it was you, but when you recognize the handwriting, you know it was that person who put that down.
But that's true of writing too. I mean, the only thing, once, it will not surprise you to know that from a very early age, I was a really manic reader. I read the way people used to smoke cigarettes. I light one book off the butt of the other, you know, and forge ahead. And when I look at my shelves, I mean, once I look at Bleak House and The Sound and the Fury and Wuthering Heights and all of Trollope and The House of Mirth, if you're looking for what books are about, what they cover, everything's already been written. The only thing that you bring to the table, whether you're writing a letter to your grandchild or you're writing a novel, is your personality, which is as individual as a fingerprint. And it's why people go on writing novels, and it's why people go on writing letters, because you are distinct in the world, and that is embedded in your writing.
So thank you for sharing that, and I'm going to come back with questions. But we wanted to just get a sense of the room, and we can actually see you. The lights are bright, but we can see you. So we had a few questions for you just to get a sense of the room. We would guess that you are here because you care deeply about writing. And so the first question is, over the last 2 years, how many of you kept a journal or a diary or in some way were recording what was happening for you during the pandemic?
Wow.
Wow.
That's good.
And how many of you at any point in your life have kept a journal or a diary to keep track of what you have been experiencing? Okay, there we're getting a lot more. So I have a couple more questions for you all. In the last 2 weeks, I'm not going to ask how many of you have written an email, because that does not seem like an interesting question. How many of you have written a handwritten note that you have either delivered or mailed? I'm not sure this is a representative audience. That was a lot of you.
No, but they're thrilling me.
That is great. I have 2 more questions. One is, how many of you have a file or a box or a drawer where you keep notes, letters that people have sent to you that you want to hold on to? Right? There's the power of the written word, these things that there's a moment, and I'm always struck by the moments where I want to go open the file, where I'm like, I just need to see this letter or note from a particular person. Okay, and then the last question is, how many of you have a favorite pen? We are with our people, just so you know, like we are so with our people. Do you have a favorite pen?
I have a favorite kind of pen.
I do too.
And then they eliminated it several years ago.
Okay, so what is your favorite pen?
It's a roller ball that Pilot makes. I like roller balls because when I'm signing books, it smooths things out. I don't use a fountain pen. I mean, I have some fancy fountain pens that have been given to me over the years, but that doesn't work for me. It's a black, it has to be black. It's a black roller ball, and it works really well for book signings.
And mine is it's not an expensive pen, but I'm very particular about it. It's the Pentel RSVP ballpoint pen in blue. And I really like the fine point, but you can't get the fine. They're all medium now. I find this very upsetting.
Well, I'm thrilled to be with you here tonight, but the combination of the blue and the fine point is making me realize that there are differences between us that I hadn't figured out up until this point.
We're just going to agree to disagree about our pen use. Okay, so the question now that I want to ask you is about the power of language, the power of the written word. And one of the things I often say as a linguist is there is this expression that we have, which is sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me, which is one of the least true things you could say about language. Because, of course, words can do enormous harm. And one of the things about words is that if you speak them or write them and give them to someone, you can write them and delete them, and there may be no memory of that, but you can't get them back. You can apologize for them, you can try to make amends, but they're out there doing their work in the world. And you talk about it with the quote, actions, not words, and you say, but words are actions, which of course, the linguist, I say, yes, speech act theory. This is words do work in the world. And in the book, you write about the Freedom Writers, this remarkable group of students who were in Ellen Gruwell's class at Wilson High School in Long Beach, California. And a student, I just wrote that people don't understand the importance of the pen as opposed to a gun. And you write, the power of the pen was that instead of destroying, wounding, it created, healed. And I wanted to give you the space to reflect a little bit more about how you think about language in general, or the written word specifically, its power to heal and its power to harm.
Well, obviously both are really true. For example, Kanye West has just illustrated for all of us that there are words that you can use on Instagram that make an entire class of Americans feel marginalized and in fact under threat. So I think particularly in social media, because it happens so quickly, the opportunity to hurt people is enormous. And people feel as though because it's so fast and because it's social media, it doesn't wound in the same way. It reaches so many other people, that so much of an audience that it wounds even more. But if any of you are not familiar with the Freedom Writers and the Freedom Writers Diary, take a look. Anne Gruwell had this class of what were considered unteachable students in Long Beach. They were the kids who had already been in juvie, who had been suspended before, who were considered to have learning disabilities of various kinds, and she got them when they were first year in high school and made them keep journals, and also made them read journals. They read The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. And to read the Freedom Writers Diary, which shows the progression of them over the years, is to watch a group of people who, first of all, are hugely skeptical about what the point of all this is, and who wind up having it utterly change their lives. Because there's something about putting down on paper without fear or favor, as it used to say in the lobby of the old New York Times building, what had happened to them, the deaths, the sexual assaults, the being thrown out of their homes, the watching their parents succumb to drugs or succumbing to them themselves, that made them look at their life in a way that enabled them to change it. And that's something that writing can do too, that when you look at the facts of your own life, it makes them both more and less powerful. More because you've been able to confront them, and less because you've been able to confront them, because you look at them and say, yes, this happened, there it is, there it is. And that's what the Freedom Writers do over and over again. And it's so thrilling to watch the progression of these kids who are thought of as unteachable and who wind up going to college. One of them who talks in her diary about how much she hates to write and how bad she is at it. Erin describes looking back from the 10 years that have elapsed since the Freedom Writers and talking about writing her PhD thesis. So it's such I wrote about it when it first came out, a column for Newsweek, and she and I have kept in touch over the years, and she's such a good example of what writing can do for ordinary people. I mean, I've said over and over again, when this book first came out, everyone assumed that it was part of a long line of books about writing for writers. I don't really feel that most of the writers I know need a book about writing. I wanted to write a book for what I described in this book as civilians, people who don't think of themselves as writers. Unfortunately, that's most people, because we've professionalized writing. I write for a living. That makes me a writer. Everybody can be a writer. Not a writer who does it for a living, not a writer who might be published between hardcovers, but someone who writes, just as, while I do not pretend to be a teacher by profession, and by the way, I think it's the hardest profession there is in my mind, and I am a writer because of teachers. I am completely a writer because over and over again, teachers said to me, this is good. You should keep on doing it. I cannot ever repay the teachers that I had over the years. But I do teaching in a small way because I had 3 children and now I have 3 grandchildren, and I tried to teach all of those people. So we professionalize certain ways of doing things that we shouldn't professionalize. Everybody can and should be a writer because it's good for them and potentially good for us, and because if we want history to reflect who we really were and what we really did and what we really cared about, then instead of only having it be written by prosperous white men, those of us who are female and people of color and people of gender diversity, we need to write our own histories in our own way, because I can guarantee you, given the source material that I worked on from this book, that some of that 50 or 100 years ago will find its way into history books and make it truer than the history that we've seen in the past.
And I appreciate you making that argument here. I think and I appreciate it in the book as well. And there are a couple directions. I'm going to come back to the question of words, the healing work, the reflective work they do, and go down this education road for a moment, because I think it's such an important one. And in the book, you talk about your concern, and one that I share, that too many students, we'll just start with K through 12, somewhere along the way are getting this sense that I can't write, I'm not a good writer, I don't like writing, and what a loss that is for them and for us, because those are stories that don't then get written down if they get convinced that they don't like writing. And you talk about concerns about rote assignments that aren't interesting to write, the fear of the red pen. I have many thoughts as a linguist about that. And one of the things that I always say to new teachers of writing, and I've spent a lot of my career training teachers, is that if you are writing an assignment and you are not excited to read the student's work, you've got to redo the assignment. Because the students will know that they do not have an opportunity to write anything interesting in response to this assignment, right? You should write an assignment and think, I can hardly wait to read what these students are going to write, because, and I sometimes I would have students write the history of a word and what it means to them, and I would learn the most amazing things about words, and they would turn them in and they would say, with this note of surprise, these must actually be fun to read. Like this was a new experience for them and for me. You might actually want to read these assignments. And I said, I do, because I learn a lot when I read these assignments. All that said, as you also write about in the book, writing is hard, and it requires a lot of revision along the way. And so I was hoping that you could talk a little bit, as this amazing writer that you are, about how you think about that balance of the joy and the inspiration and the hard work because you write about the fact that this isn't easy, even for most people. You do make possibility for exceptions.
Well, no, and I always talk about that when I go and speak, particularly to high school students. I say writing is really intimidating and it's really hard, and I know that because I find writing really intimidating and really hard. I sit down at the computer every morning with a sense of impending dread. It's not going to be good. It's not going to be eloquent. And then I begin. The other night I was doing an event with the novelist Jodi Picoult, and Jodi said that her watchword is, you can revise a bad paragraph, but you cannot revise a blank page. And I thought that was such a smart thing to say, because every morning I think, well, now I'm going to write a bad paragraph. But I want to tell students that because, as I say in the book, for some reason in America, we have developed this idea that people who are good at things find them effortless. People say to me all the time, oh, it must be so easy for you. You know, you're a natural. And I think, no, absolutely not. And so because of this effortlessness that is now baked into American culture, if students start to write and they find it hard, they therefore conclude that they are not writers. And I want them to stop doing that. I want them to understand that I am somebody who does this for a living, who has done it virtually all her life, and who still finds it really hard. And I also want them to understand that writing at some level is not about putting words together. It's an exercise in confidence. Because what it is saying, I have something to say, and you should listen to me. And particularly for adolescents, that kind of confidence doesn't come easy. But I fear that they're not getting the opportunity to build those muscles in schools. And here again, I am not criticizing teachers. So many of them have curricular strictures that are ridiculous and are teaching to tests which the states mandate. But the National Writing Project, which keeps track of how writing is being taught in secondary schools around the country, has found over and over again that the amount of discursive writing, never mind creative writing, which has completely fallen by the wayside and is for lots of adolescents the most fun they ever have. But most discursive writing is almost non-existent. And what we think of now in schools as writing is things like an assignment that says, there were 3 main causes of the French Revolution. Describe them, which is slightly above a multiple choice question. I mean, it's not writing, it's spitting back, the facts in some set to music way. And I really would love it if we could bring more discursive and creative writing into the schools, because it certainly benefited me and made me feel, as I said, at a certain level, like I was good at that.
Mm-hmm. And of course, there are a good number of young people who are engaging in that writing outside of the curricular spaces. They're writing fan fiction, for example, where they're getting enormous pleasure out of writing. And we have graduate students and others here who are working on what can we learn from the amount of time and pleasure students get from writing in some spaces and find that pleasure in school, to recognizing the strictures that teachers are working under.
Exactly. And, I went into the newspaper business at a time when suddenly it was beginning to embrace the idea of what it called bright writing in newspapers. I mean, if you look at newspapers from the 50s and the 60s, the prose was unbelievably dull. I mean, it really was who, what, when, where, and why. Mm-hmm. And adjective was nary to be found. And I was lucky that I had those inclinations, and I hit the ground running in newspapers at a time when we could bring them to play. And I think we can bring them to play in all kinds of venues where we haven't thought to use them before, even, dare I say, in academic papers. I mean, I
Please
read...
dare to say that.
I mean, I read academic books all the time that, well, I'm thinking of Carolyn Weber's book that I think she won a series of prizes for, called What Marie Antoinette Wore to the Revolution. And it's charting French history during a certain period based on what Marie Antoinette was wearing. And it seems like the most improbable idea, and it totally works, and it's written in such a lively fashion, and yet it's deeply academic at some level. And I think it's really important to step outside always of your little box of science writing or academic prose and say, I want to bring the reader along. You know, that's what I tried to do as a reporter, and it's what I'm always thinking of in my novels. I'm throwing out the line with the lure at the end of it, and then I'm bringing it in little by little, and I'm hoping to get the reader to shore. And the only way you can do that is by producing prose that really comes from your gut as well as from your head.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's so many places I want to take this. First, I just want to recognize it's in your book and it's in what you've been saying here, and I love it, which is your respect for young people and their voices and what they have to say, and your push for them to have the opportunities to write that and for us to listen.
Well, there's nothing, I must say, I just turned 70, and for the weekend of my 70th birthday, I got a tattoo on my left hip and braces on my teeth. And one of my friends keeps saying that if I get knocked up in the back of a car, she's going to be very annoyed at me. But there's nothing that irritates me more among my friends than what I call creeping codgerism. And that is looking at young people and saying, well, they don't know how to X. Because I remember being a 20-year-old in the newsroom and having certain reporters who were 50 or 60 or 70 years old passing judgment on me purely by virtue of my age. Now, with my age came inexperience. There is no question about it. With my age came a kind of an excitement and a passion and fresh eyes on the craft that was nothing but a good thing. So I think about that all the time when I look at people who are in their teens or their 20s, or my kids who are in their 30s, or my grandkids. You know, I'm throwing, this is totally gratuitous, but I'm throwing this in because my last nonfiction book was called Nanaville, and you know what that was about. So the other day I'm reading Lyle Lyle Crocodile to a 6-year-old who's really engaged in natural histories in a special program at the American Museum of Natural History, and he looks at me, he goes, Nana, that's not a crocodile, it's an alligator. And I'm like, Lyle Crocodile is an alligator? The importance of identification and words. And I took him very seriously. And I think it's really a mistake in terms of understanding the world to not to take people seriously because they're younger. Because youth definitely has some downsides, and it certainly has some upsides. Ditto getting older.
Absolutely. And one of my favorite lectures that I give is about, is texting ruining English? Because there is this, among older people, this sense that younger people are ruining the written language with texting. And the argument I'm making, which is actually this is not chaos, and they have repurposed punctuation. And if you don't know the difference between okay, no punctuation, and okay, period, then you have a problem, because young people know exactly what the difference is.
How about that laugh out loud used to mean like, ha, 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 and now it sort of means, oh my God. You know?
Yes, it means many things.
The only brief I have against texting and emailing, both of which I do to a fare thee well, is that it gives us a false sense that we're writing in a thoughtful and meaningful way. It's as different from, it's as different from writing in a discursive, thoughtful way as walking is from riding a bicycle. They're both really worthy ways to get around, but they're essentially different and they work different muscles. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind. I mean, all the writers I know say, a lot of them say they just shut down their wireless connection while they're working at their computers, because if they write 10 decent emails, they go, I'm done for the day, and I understand that impulse. So I think it's really important to keep in mind that they're different muscles, right, and they leave different footprints behind.
I think you put that beautifully, and I'm going to use that to circle back to the power of writing. And you write about writing as a kind of panacea, or it has that potential, and that and here I think we're talking about the kind of discursive writing, that writing can be a way that we reflect, and reflecting can lead to understanding, and understanding, as you write, can lead to happiness, a sense of well-being. And you write about, I want to go in two different directions. One is writing during the pandemic, and the other is in medicine, writing in medicine, and I want to make sure we talk about that because I think it's an incredibly powerful part of the book. But you talk about during the pandemic that there were people who were baking bread and knitting scarves, and people who were writing, who really found this as a moment to write. And it brings us back to a comment you were making earlier about the importance of having a diverse set of voices to record what happened. And Lynette was saying, we thought we'd all remember what this was like. There's a wonderful word that I vote on the word of the year among many things that I do as a linguist. And this didn't win, but the word is Blur's Day.
Wow.
Which was the sense that like all days just were Blur's Day
Yeah.
during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Like who knows what day of the week it was. It was just Blur's Day. But that we need the stories of the frontline workers, we need the stories of the communities like the African American community, the Latino community that were hit particularly hard, the Native American community by the pandemic, the people who were living alone, the people who were with their partners and couldn't get away from them, the people who were homeless. Right? I mean, that we need all of these stories. And so I wanted to give you a chance to just reflect on what you saw as you've been working on this book about writing during the pandemic and the potential for what it might give us as we try to understand what we've been through.
Well, I was quite concerned about it, and my concern stemmed from a letter which I quote in the book. And it's a letter from a nurse who's in Washington, D.C., taking care of soldiers who are dying during a pandemic, except that the pandemic is a flu pandemic and the year she's writing is 1919. And I kept wondering, are we going to have these letters? Are we going to have this record? And I'm still not sure we know. I think we're still a little shell-shocked, obviously, still saying, no mask? And I think we have to wait and see what comes out of people's journals and people's letters. But I think it's enormously important that we have it and that we have these lives of ordinary people. And that's one of the reasons why I hate the idea of writing being professionalized. There's a story I tell in the book where this really lovely woman who is from Somalia and is living in a section of Minneapolis, which is called Little Mogadishu, because so many people from Somalia have settled there, comes up to me at an event and starts to tell me about her journey and about her children and about how hard the immigrant experience can be. And I said to her, this is fantastic, you should write this down. And she said, I am not a writer. And it was one of those moments that made me think, but we need to know that this happened to you. We need to know for now. We need to know for the future. We're able to demonize immigrants because we haven't heard from this hardworking woman from Somalia, because we haven't heard the individual stories of the people from Haiti or the people who came across the border illegally, according to our statutes. And when you meet, we understand the world. We understand people individually. We don't understand them as a group. As soon as they become a group, as soon as they become Democrats, Republicans, Latinx, trans, as soon as they become a group, you can make assumptions and judgments about them that ignores their essential individuality and humanity. And the thing that writing from a personal perspective does is resurfaces. I am a trans woman, but I think this. I am a gay man, but I think that. I am the granddaughter of Italian immigrants who did not speak really good English, whose daughter didn't go to college because it was assumed that she would just waste a college education when she was going to have a mess of kids and get married. And I got to write for the New York Times. That's the American story, but the American story gets told that way best, from the immigrant grandparents to the daughter with the foreshortened expectations to the granddaughter who got to write in the pages of the New York Times. And that's why we need to write our individual stories.
And there's, maybe we'll get to this in the Q&A, but there's, you write about, and I think it is an interesting question, this new technologies living alongside old. And as we figure out what stories do we have coming out of the pandemic, there will be what's written, and then the other ways that people are telling stories that are recorded into phones now, where people are telling oral narratives, which of course in the history of the world has been a way that we haven't always been able to hold on to stories. It's a way stories have been passed down, and now we may be able to hold on to some of those through other technologies, which I think
And of course,
powerful.
it's such a mistake to just focus on the negatives about the new technologies, because so many of them do what is most important about words, which is to make people feel less alone. So if there's an Instagram outlet that talks to young women who are feeling deeply insecure about themselves, or men who feel a need for connection that doesn't exist in their lives, and people can go on and find that. I think that's only for the good.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask you, I want to turn to the section on medicine before we open it up, and we want to hear questions from all of you, so you can be thinking about questions you want to ask. You have a chapter on medicine, and before we came out here, you and I were talking, and you mentioned that this was a part of the book that you thought you might not include, and then lots of people tell you that they're so glad you did. I am one of them. I was thrilled to see this in the book. And for those of you who haven't read this, it's about a field that's now often known as narrative medicine, or that's part of it. And I started reading it, and I thought, oh, Rita Sharon. And then the next page, you said, there's this professor at Columbia University's medical school named Rita Sharon. I was like, well, okay. And I came to this because about 10 years ago, I was asked to do a keynote speech at the American College of Rheumatology. And my friend said, they do know what you do, right?
I get that same reaction.
And I said, they do seem to know what I do. And the talk I gave was Words That Heal. And it was about the importance of language in medicine, which is exactly what you're writing about here, that medicine is deeply human. It's about people who live in bodies, who have experiences and narratives. And Rita Sharon writes about narrative competence, the ability to absorb and interpret, process, speak back people's narratives as a key part of medicine. She also writes about that, and you write about this, that for doctors and nurses and other health practitioners to write as a way to reflect their own humanness as part of this process, they're taking on an enormous load in the work that they do. and that this is a way to connect with patients, a way to reinforce the humanity of everyone involved. So I'd love to hear how you came to this work and your thoughts about including it. And you were interviewing some of the doctors who do this work, and I'd love to hear about that process of learning about this part of medicine.
Well, one of the ways it's so valuable in healthcare is that there's an incredibly high rate of burnout among healthcare professionals. And one of the things I keep saying about why I wrote this book is we're a society that talks all the time now about high levels of stress, high levels of anxiety, a sense of loss of connection, a sense of loss of community. And data has shown us that we have at our fingertips something that will help with all those things, and we don't use it, and that's writing. And one of the things that Rita learned from developing a practice called narrative medicine, where she asks third-year medical students to write what are called parallel charts. In other words, you have the chart that we're all familiar with. It has the patient's age and the condition and gender and so on and so forth. The parallel chart is the stuff that you notice about the patient, but you can't put in that chart. Patient doesn't receive any visitors. Patient seems to weep with some regularity. Those things that connect the practitioner to the humanity of the person in the bed in a way that they may not have been connected otherwise. I mentioned that one doctor who on grand rounds was taking someone's pulse on their wrist. And one of the students said, why did you bother to do that? Their pulse rate is on that digital readout right over the bed. And the older doctor said, it's always important to touch people, but he really meant something more than just taking their pulse. And one of the things that parallel chart seems to have done is to cause medical students to touch people in a way that they hadn't, but also to touch something inside themselves, to find that connection in the description between them and the patient. And it was so illustrative to me to hear from Rita about the power that these young doctors found in writing. And she sent me on to a very well-known poet who is the poetry editor of the Journal of the American Medical Association. Now, one of the great things about nonfiction work is that you find out things you had no idea about. So, of course, I call him and say, I had no idea there was poetry in the Journal of the American Medical Association. They publish a poem every month, because again, it gives healthcare professionals some connection to this other part of them, which is so important. And I originally came to the idea because for many years I've been a judge of an essay contest at the Yale School of Nursing. And when I was first asked, I was like, the Yale School of Nursing has an essay contest? Well, they're so beautiful. They're so beautiful, and over again, what the students say is, this enabled me to see my vocation in a different way and to see the people I work with in a different way, to enlarge their sphere. And that's what writing does. It enlarges our universe. And that's such an affirmative good. And it's so palpable. We were talking backstage about the president of Barnard College. Her name is Sian Beilock. She's a social psychologist. And after I was finished the book, because you always get great material after you've done the book that people tell you about, Sian told me about an experiment that her team had done. They took a group of students who had a high level of anxiety about a math test, and they divided them in two. One group went off to study for the math test, and the other group were charged with writing about their anxiety. How did it manifest? why this particular test, what was it that was causing them, and across the board, the group that wrote about it did better on the math test. And when she told me that, I thought, boom, my work here is done.
And the second edition that will go in. And I think you have a great quote from Laura Vader, I think, in that chapter where she, who's a doctor, and in talking, where she says something about in this chaotic world and life that she's living as a doctor, writing slows me down. And you write about that in the book a lot, and you're talking about here. It slows you down, it makes her reflect, and then she says, and it makes me a better doctor.
And by the way, Laura Vader is one of those people who has a beautiful resonant Instagram feed that talks about what doctors need from an emotional point of view. She's an oncologist, and so she's really plugged into the notion that we need to relieve and to help ourselves, at the same time that she's also doing longer, more discursive writing. So whenever I see Laura's Instagram feed, I think, we can walk and chew gum, and she's doing it every day while practicing medicine.
So this is a moment where we want to give you all a chance to ask your questions. So there are, I believe, 2 microphones and it may help to bring the lights down or up.
House?
So that we can see the audience a little better, but we would welcome questions from the audience at this point. Thank you. So right now, I cannot actually see the microphones.
Can we bring the house up to half house?
There we go.
Thank you.
So the microphones are in the aisles there. Oh, great. I see we've got a question.
Hi. Do you guys allow long questions? I have a long question because I think it matters.
Okay, I would say as concise as you can make it would be great.
So I'm a young person, and my favorite pen is my thumb. And I write lots of emails to my teachers and even staff to your office, Anne Curzan. And I write things on Instagram, but my favorite writing place is the WeChat. I chat. A text is my own form of writing, and I post, and I can feel the pain even as writing on phone, because I revise my post. Like I unconsciously, like 10 times after I've done original posting. So I use WeChat because I'm Chinese, and this is my second year here, and I even have some words that I don't understand, like panacea. What's panacea? Yeah, but I understand perfectly Blur's Day. I perfectly support Blur's Day for the year of 2020, the word of 2020, the word of year for 2020. But I am a writer who have confidence directly from my gut. I post like 5 times a day on WeChat moments, and then I have criticized, and I not only get criticized, I gradually can see how people stop liking me anymore. And when there's a girl who she's a writer herself, and she criticized me like, you cannot just show off your talent. And I was like, okay, it was like farting. So I know it probably stinks, but I cannot control it. So I'm a confident writer straight from my gut. But then, I have no likes, I have no comments. I feel quite lonely. Actually, I'm here because this is the event that that makes me feel less lonely. I like it when Anne says we need diverse voices, and I like it when Anna says like we need to know. But the question is, where is the we for me? How can I get the we? And how can I eventually become the we?
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Anna?
Well, first of all, I'm going to treasure the sentence, my favorite pen is my phone, because I think that's a really astute observation. And I also think that it takes a long time to build up a we, depending on where you're from and where you're going. The one thing I would say about working so much as a writer in text and on WeChat and on your phone is, I want to know where you can find those things in 10 or 15 or 20 years. Because you're going to want to look back on this moment in your life and say, this is where I was looking for my we, and this is where I found it. And one of the things that I fear about technology is that it's easy to lose it. Rita Sharon, who the dean mentioned, says you can always print these things out and then you'll have them forever. But I think most of us don't really do that. And so I want you to find a safe place to cache all your stuff, and I want you to be confident as you are in your writing. I want you to be confident that you're going to find your we sooner rather than later. Ni hao, shusha.
So thank you for sharing that. So we've got a question over here.
Yes. I would like, Anna, thank you for coming, and you're wonderful. I would like you to expand, to say more about when we become a member of a group, no matter what the group is, Democrat, Republican, Catholic, Czechoslovakian, black, white, whatever, that we are easily dismissed. We are no longer individuals. We are no longer humans. We are no longer people with rights. And could you expand on that, please?
We no longer necessarily perceive ourselves that way. Let me give you an example. Think of a photograph of a high school class. It's this big blur of faces, as opposed to the individual graduation photograph of one member of the class. You see that individual photograph and you think, oh, she has long hair, oh, she's wearing glasses, oh, the individuality jumps out at you in a way that with groupthink, it doesn't necessarily do. And I think one of the traps that we've fallen into, I'm going to say in America, but it might be across the world, is this groupthink. That people of a certain ilk are a certain way. I used to say, I'm a feminist and I wear mascara. And that was to fight against this groupthink that feminists are a certain kind of woman. And I think one of the things that we do when we tell our individual stories is say, our whole lives should be, yes, but. Yes, I'm this, that, and the other thing, but that piece of myself that takes me out of that kind of groupthink. And it's another reason why I think it's so important that we tell our individual stories, so that we move away from the groupthink, the big graduation group picture, and more to the individual faces of the people around us.
Thank you.
Great, so we'll come over here.
Hi. It's such a treat to hear you talking tonight. I just retired from teaching English at a community college for 25 years.
Yes.
Mostly freshman comp. I'm kind of tired. And during that time, I haven't written very much, but there's a few things I want to write. I wanted to share purple pens are my favorite pens, especially for grading. And I think just wanted to share, my husband kept track of every meal we had at home for the first year of the pandemic. Everything. And we still go back to it and go, oh, that was a good meal. Let's make that again. I think he wrote more than that, but he's not shared more than that with me. So that's all I wanted to say.
That's fantastic, though. What a great idea.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your work teaching first-year
Really.
writing. Couldn't be more important.
I say that as a proud English major.
So come over here.
Hi, it's me again, Anna. My question for you is, as a woman with so many firsts, how did you just keep on persevering through like a male-dominated like job and just being such a role model to so many people. I mean, to me, to many women that just like kind of see you as like, I can do that. You did it, and now I can do that, and I'll get there. But I just wanted to know, like, what is just something that you could share that just kept you through, like, kept you going?
Well, not to sound too self-important, I had kind of a moral obligation to do it. I wound up at the New York Times when I was a 24-year-old tabloid reporter because 6 very brave women at the New York Times brought a class action suit on behalf of all women at the paper, charging that the paper didn't hire, pay, or promote women in parity with men. And I was hired purely as a response to that suit. I had some good clips, I'd done some good work, but I was by no matter of means what was thought of as a typical, well, they were always called Times men. And so I was, for the first 6 months I was there, after I was hired, I thought I'd been hired because I was the smartest little girl reporter in America. And then somebody filled me in on the facts. And once I knew the facts, I thought that only a really bad person would not feel a moral obligation to do their best work, to bring other women along, and to stand up for women every chance that she got. So the fact is, I stood on the shoulders of the people who came before me, and therefore I felt like I had an obligation to offer my shoulders every chance I got.
Thank you for that.
So we'll come over here.
I love your sentence that you can revise a bad paragraph, but you can't revise a blank page. So to that notion, I ask, when you're writing a book or you're dealing with enormous amounts of notes, material, observations, what's your process for organizing all this? Do you just write it through and then edit it? Do you go piece by piece? What do you do to present these long-form works in a coherent form?
For the nonfiction books, I usually have done a lot of note-taking on my computer. I mean, when I do an interview with somebody like Rita Sharon, I am taking notes the whole time, typing as fast as I can, and those notes are labeled and organized in my computer. But when I start to write, they're always on paper. I print everything out. It's just still the way, I mean, I came of age in the business on paper. And so I usually have this paper stack next to me, and the notes are organized based on where I think the chapters might fall. And then I just start writing and start to write through, but I wind up moving paragraphs and sentences around a fair amount. The process is considerably different when I'm working on a novel, because unfortunately I have no notes and nothing to print out. As I said last night to the fellows, the notebook is in my head when I'm writing a novel in terms of who people are, where they've been, what their birth order is, and all the like. And that's what makes fiction writing still more challenging for me. But when I'm working on a nonfiction book, I usually have a stack of papers right next to me, and I'm just muddling through.
One just small addition. So when you're writing your novel, do you write the whole thing and then go about revising, or do you write portions of it, not understanding what the other portions are going to be, and edit those as you go along?
My second son is a young adult novelist, and he and I have talked a lot about the fact that we think there are 2 kinds of novelists. Ones who work on a chapter and then go back and revise that chapter and move stuff around in that chapter, and then eventually go on to the next chapter. And then what we call run like hell to the end novelists. Both of us are run like hell to the end novelists. So I do not look back. I just go to the end of the first draft. And then my process is that I read the entire book aloud when I finish a first draft, because my eye will forgive things that my ear will not. My ear will hear run-on sentences, clunky meter and rhythm, because I'm a very oral, A-U-R-A-L, writer, lines of dialogue that don't sound like real people said them. And when I finish that read through, and well, I won't say I'm happy, but I'm done, then I send it to my editor, who has edited all my books and who now speaks pretty fluent Quindlen. And several weeks later, I get back voluminous notes and a very heavily annotated manuscript. And I immediately turn my back on it and reject it all and think, she's never understood me. And then about 2 weeks later, I start to work on it and do some of the revisions she suggested, although not all. I usually feel like she's incorrect about maybe 30% of what she tells me to do, and then the other 70% I do. And then I do another run through, because usually I've added and moved stuff, and she goes through with a much lighter hand that third time, and then we put the thing to bed.
Thank you. I'm going to keep running like hell.
Okay.
And I will just make one comment there. I think a nice thing you talk about in the book is your experience as a reporter and a novelist, and that one of listening as a reporter to all these people speak, you feel has made you better at trying to capture them on the page.
I think there's no question that one of the reasons I'm pretty easy with dialogue, with characters, is because of all those years of writing real people's words down in my notebook. And also that I know how to keep it tight. You know, I mean, when you're in the newspaper business and you've got 800 words for a story and you really want to bring the reader into the world, you get maybe 3 or 4 telling details. And those telling details can carry so much freight if you've done it right. And I still bring that to my work as a novelist over and over again. I feel like the single best preparation I could have had for a life as a novelist, which I always wanted from the time I was a kid, was my life as a newspaper reporter.
So we'll have time for a couple more questions, so we'll come over here.
Hi, thank you so much for your time, Anna, and nice to see you, Anne. You might have just answered my question, because it was about editing and criticism and sort of the sharing your writing process. So I'm in the process of writing a dissertation, a very specific type of writing and project, and it sometimes feels like a real privilege to have these 4 scholars, sharing their thoughts on my work. And on the other hand, sometimes it feels truly heartbreaking to get, this amount of notes, and you kind of feel illegible in a way. So I guess my question is about, when do you dig in your heels, and, you take those 2 weeks to say she's completely wrong and come back to it, but how you sort of deal with that in a process that, a dissertation obviously has to be passed by a certain committee, but the same goes for, you have editors and all types of writing in newspapers. So that's sort of my question.
There's a turn of phrase a lot of us use, kill your darlings, and it happens to you all the time. I mean, my editor will say to me, story slows down here, and there'll be a big slash through description, and I'll think, that was beautiful writing. Oh my God. And at first, I'm like, I'm not getting rid of that. And then I start doing other things, and then I go back and I'm like, okay, it does slow the story down a little bit, but it's so beautifully written, we're keeping it. And usually by the 3rd time around, I say, I'm killing my darlings, And it's you in love with the sound of your own voice. And one of the things you have to say is, does it serve the thing you have to say in the newspaper business, when you're writing novels, always is, does it serve the readers? You're sitting at the computer, or I guess some people do still write longhand, as I say in the book, although I can't imagine how. And you're having a conversation There's nobody on the other side, but you are having a conversation. And the truth of the matter is, and let me take a moment to say this, because I spend 98% of my life in a little room by myself, looking at a computer screen thinking, is anybody going to read this and care about it? So when I go out in the world and I look out and I see you, I can live on this for the next 6 months. So thank you, but I'm always thinking you're sitting on the other side of that computer screen. And if I'm not having a conversation, if I'm not talking to somebody else, I'm doing it wrong. And that's what you have to say to yourself. Am I having that communication? Because there are sometimes when you write something that feels really apt, but it's not part of a conversation.
Thank you so much.
I think we have time for one more question, and I just want to check to make sure, do we have any questions from the digital audience? One more question.
So I just wanted to say I love much of your writing, but One True Thing came along at a time where it really spoke to me, and the sacrifices that were made by the characters in that book just were really profound. And what I wanted to ask you is, what did it feel like to give that book up to a major motion picture? And did you feel like your voice came through as it did in the book in the movie?
Well, you know, writers, it is axiomatic that writers are big babies. We are all big babies. And so some of us are really big babies about the movie thing. And when I meet somebody who says, I'm really worried they're going to change my book, I say to them, they are going to change your book, because a novel and a movie are two different art forms, and they require a different way of looking at the material. So if you're worried they're going to change your book, here's all you need to do. Don't cash the check. And there is a check involved, okay? I was really, really lucky. A producer named Harry Uffland really resonated to the material. And all down the line, Karen Kroner, who wrote the excellent screenplay, Carl Franklin, who directed, my old friend Meryl, who starred, and of course got an Academy Award nomination because like she showed up. So, and the young Renee Zellweger, the veteran Bill Hurt, everybody seemed to have a resonance for the material. And I remember, so I don't hang around. I don't do screenplays. I come one day to the set of each film. And it so happened to be the night that Meryl and Renee were doing a scene that is really basically the linchpin, where Ellen Golden thinks she's telling her mother something dreadful about her father that her mother already knows. And they went upstairs. I was down with the kids at the crafts table, because the crafts table has M&Ms and Doritos, and they went upstairs and they came back down. Meryl had a bald cap on and really looked like someone who was really facing imminent death. And she turned to Carl and said, could we do one take as written in the novel? And my heart just skipped a beat. And that actually is the take they used. And so everybody had such concern. I think it's a brilliant movie. And I am so honored to be part of the source material. And the other thing is, per your introductory remarks, I am deeply honored when a novel of mine makes anyone feel less alone in their struggles in the world, whether it's Black and Blue for some women I've met, or Every Last One, or One True Thing. You know, the thing about reading is it's the most powerful thing on earth, because it makes us feel less alone. And that's everything. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm not sure we could come up with a more powerful place
I don't think
to
so.
end than that. That was an incredible answer. Thank you for being here. Thank you for everything you've written and given to us and everything you've done in your career. What an honor to get to be here and talk with you. Thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. So glad to be here in person with all of you getting to share this
It is
time.
quite amazing.
Thank you for inviting me, Lynette.
be here in
Thank you for
person.
doing this. And I have to tell you all that until this morning, I thought Zingerman's was only a mail order catalog. So thank you for inviting me to Ann Arbor.
She was very excited that Zingerman's is an actual place. And I want to say on the record for people in town, Anne Curzan, I think you should have your own show. I know that we listen to you on Sundays. I think that there's a radio program or a podcast in you. I could listen to you talk to people all the time. So I'm just putting that into the universe so that it can become so. Not that you don't already have a few things to do, but you can multitask.
It's very kind of you. Thank you, Lynette.
Thank you again.
Thank you all, and we look forward to the next book. I hope that you all here will go home and find your favorite pen, even if it is your phone, and write something meaningful and understand in the process that you are writing something meaningful and leaving something of yourself for the other people in the world who love you and want to know you. Thank you.